Okay. What was Madison's plan? Anybody get that far? Go ahead. Yes. Why were Southerners upset with this plan? Go ahead, Georgia. Southerners began to suspect what? Go, Charles, go. And that really is surprising because if you look at the South, Madison, Washington, Jefferson are all Southerners. Okay? But the people in the Deep South still thought that. Hamilton, not in book. What party is Hamilton, everybody? Federalist, good. Hamilton's plan supported the Tariff of 1789, but he believed the government also needed what? Good. The ability to borrow money, and that's where that credit comes in. So that would establish the government's credit. Read for information, customs duties, and excise taxes. Let's read through this together. Go, Jesse, go. I'm right on the handout, just from the handout. You can let the light on there if you would.
Okay. Wait. Hamilton believed that a national debt was good for the country. The more creditors to whom the government owed money, the more people there would be with a personal stake in the success of the government. Hamilton supported the first tariff law of 1789, which imposed taxes on certain exports. This brought in much needed revenue for the government and compensated small Americans.
Hamilton believed the federal government should do what regarding the debts? What's that word, everybody? Assume or assumption, yes. Who argued against Hamilton's plan? Madison, yes, and other Southerners. Who did Madison feel the plan was unfair to? Yeah, and especially, yes, and 100% right, and especially widows who lost their husbands in the war, yeah. Okay. Madison and other Southerners were upset because who owned most of the bonds? Northerners. So who would have to pay the most taxes then to pay off the bonds? Southerners. This is important. What deal was arranged by Hamilton, Madison, and Jefferson? Take notice I didn't mention Washington. Anybody get that? Okay, let's look at the next part there. We're on the handout. Don't even worry about the book. Just look at the handout. There's the answer. Summary. Okay, let's take a look. Jesse, go ahead.
Hamilton pushed for funding at par, which meant that the federal government would pay off its debts at face value plus interest. He also pushed for assumption in which the federal government would pay states' debts. States with large debts like Massachusetts accepted Hamilton's proposal, but states with small debts like Virginia did not want the government to assume state debts. Hamilton's plan was passed by Congress in 1790, a deal that placed the District of Columbia on the Potomac River.
Potomac, yeah, but that's fine. I want you to understand that the deal was that Hamilton gets his plan in order for Washington, D.C. to be created out of Virginia. That we got to know. Okay? That's the deal. I'll talk more about it as we go through class here, but I want you to know that. That was the big deal. Okay, let's go to page 3. We'll do a little bit more, and then I'm going to go over some things. Top of page 3, and I'll go over this more thoroughly. Jesse, go, please.
Alexander Hamilton proposed a bank of the United States that could paper money and provide a stable national currency. The national government would also be a place where the Treasury could deposit liens. Thomas Jefferson strongly opposed this big state, stating that it was unconstitutional. He felt that the states had the right to manage their own money. Most of the opposition came from the South, and most of the support came from the North. Hamilton prevailed, and the first Bank of the United States was created in 1791. Its charter lasted for 20 years and was located in Philadelphia.
Circle that 20 because I want you to know it expires right before the War of 1812. That's a big point, okay? So let's do a little bit more, and I realize you didn't get this far, but let's try to fill in the blanks. What do you think the next one is? What did Hamilton ask Congress to create? National Bank, yes. Or we could say federal bank, that's fine. And I'll fill in the blanks here. He argued that the government needed the bank to manage its debts. and interest payments. The bank would also issue bank notes, paper money. The notes would promote trade and encourage national currency and stimulate economic growth. Go ahead.
Can you read the last sentence again?
I'll just go again. He argued that the government needed the bank to manage its debts and interest payments. The bank would also issue bank notes, paper money. The notes also would promote, I lost my spot, trade, encourage national currency, and stimulate economic growth. Southerners opposed the plan. Why? Simply put, the northern merchants would control all of the stock and control the finances. The northern merchants were making out fine. Madison argued that Congress could not establish a bank because it was not among the federal government's what kind of powers? Enumerated. Okay, enumerated powers. What are enumerated powers? Go ahead, Georgia. Yep, specifically mentioned. I wrote specifically written, but you get the idea. What did Congress do? They passed the bank bill anyway. Hamilton argued that it could be done based on the idea of implied powers. What are implied powers? Basically anything that's necessary and proper. And I want you to write that phrase down. The interpretation is anything necessary and proper. Where did Washington take the oath of office? That one we know. New York, Federal Hall, New York, yes. Okay, let's jump up to the screen, moving right along here. The third part of Hamilton's plan was to create a bank. We get the idea, but let's just read through it real quick just to hear it one more time. Georgia, please.
Hamilton's plan supported the creation of a national bank. Wanted a national bank. The intended purpose was to manage debt, issue paper money. Hamilton believed providing a national currency would promote trade, encourage investment, and stimulate economic growth. However, Madison, Jefferson, and Southerners disagreed with the national bank bill and were highly against it.
Okay, and there's the Bank of the United States. It's still there. That's in Philadelphia. It is still there. Okay, it's right down the street from where the U.S. Mint is. Okay, but the bank, there it is. A lot of history. Hey, get excited. Think about what went on there. Hamilton was proud of that building. Go ahead.
Is it still a bank?
It is not. It's mostly a warehouse now for the Treasury Department. Good question. It's not in the enumerated powers. Let's just read through this real quick. Sarah, go.
Not in the enumerated powers. Hamilton stressed that Article 1, Section 8 says that the federal government has the power to make all the laws which are necessary and proper for the safety and security of the United States. This establishes implied powers. Congress passes the bill and Washington signs it.
Okay, moving right along here. Let's read through this just like we're reading from a book. Okay. Gracie, please.
James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, and other leaders opposed Alexander Hamilton's proposed national bank on the grounds that A. Congress had no authority to create a national bank. Alexander Hamilton proposed the Bank of the United States that will print paper money and provide a national currency. The national bank would also be a place for the treasury to deposit money. Thomas Jefferson strongly opposed the bank, stating it was unconstitutional. He thought that the states had the right to manage their own money. Most of the opposition came from the South, and most of the support came from the North. Hamilton prevailed, and the first Bank of the United States was created in 1791. Its charter lasted for 20 years and was located in Philadelphia.
Realizing we just read that from the handout, but I want to be thorough. Any questions? This is very controversial stuff here. Okay, so a deal is made. Now, you could look at this as a backroom deal. What does that mean? A backroom deal. Gracie.
Something that's kind of shady.
Yeah, it could be definitely considered kind of shady. It was not done out in public, that's for sure. But a deal is made. Those in the South, Jefferson and Madison, who were against the plan of assumption, buying back bonds, and the National Bank actually voted for it. In return, the capital was moved from New York in the north to a more middle location, the District of Columbia. Now, of course, a couple things here. You know that temporarily it wasn't Philadelphia because Washington, D.C. couldn't be built overnight. Okay. But I do want you to know Madison and Jefferson support Hamilton's plan, and then the capital is moved to D.C. Now, you tell me, why would Madison and Jefferson support this? Maggie.
Because then it's more like in the middle, and we don't feel like they have
You certainly hope that, right? But you think it had anything to do with the fact that Jefferson and Madison were from Virginia also.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? You hope that it's an honest thing. Yeah, let's move it to the middle of the country. You would hope that. But there were many that suggested no, not so much. Now notice the name I didn't mention, except for the name of the city, is George Washington. Don't think for 1 minute that this went on without Washington's knowledge. Washington knew about the whole thing. What state is Washington from? Virginia. See where we're going with this. So do you think it's a backroom deal? Is it shady, as Gracie said? What do you think?
Kinda.
So they called this a compromise. You get the idea. Let's read through this. Kaylee, please.
Opposition to Hamilton's plan, Madison and Jefferson wanted something in return. They made a deal for the location of the capital city, now known as the District of Columbia.
Okay, District of Columbia and land owned by Virginia. And notice the three heavy hitters. Madison, Jefferson, Washington are all from Virginia. Georgia, do you smell a rat here? So why is it called District of Columbia? You heard this before, but I do want you to know. Bryson, will you read this, please?
Why is it called the District of Columbia? District of Columbia is so named in honor of Christopher Columbus, used in a popular song written by him which began, Columbia, Columbia, to glory arise, the queen of the world and the child of the skies.
Did everybody know that Columbia refers to Columbus? We didn't know that. Well, I'm glad I was able to teach you something. Yes, that's Washington, of course, George Washington, and Christopher Columbus. That's why it's called that, District of Columbia. I still kind of wonder if it should be District of Amerigo. What do you think? So, how did Washington get its strange shape? Okay, I do want you to know this. Notice in 1790, and then it changed in 1846. Let me explain this. It was supposed to be a 10 by 10 square diamond, okay? And as you can see, when it was first created there, it was 10 by 10. What exactly happened? Well, here's what happened. In 1846, there was an agreement, which doesn't become official until 1850, that there would be no slave trading in the capital. And well, I'll explain that as we get to that chapter. But I want you to know this. The agreement was basically a law of Congress that there would be no slave trading in the capital of Washington, D.C. Now, no slave trading in Washington, D.C. Is Virginia a slave state? Big time. It's the home of the Confederate capital, Richmond. So what they decided to do was the people of Virginia did not want slave trading banned, so they broke away. And simply put, that's what happened. It was broken up by the people of Virginia to protect slavery. Now, you could be more specific and say slave trading, but I want you to know that. That's why it was divided or broken apart. And that's why it went from the perfect diamond to this shape. On the History Channel, they have a series called How States Got Their Shapes, and there is one you could Google and find that. They explain the whole thing. It's interesting. But that's the reason why it went from a 10 by 10 square to the diamond. All right, so let's read through this. Okay, Aiden, please.
In 1846, Abraham Lincoln was elected to Congress from Illinois on campaign plank that called for the abolition of slavery in the District of Columbia. The slave-holding residents of Alexandria feared that Lincoln's proposal would be approved. They organized a referendum calling for the retrocession of Alexandria County back to Virginia.
And that is Alexandria County. Okay, that's Alexandria, Virginia. That was taken back. That used to be part of Washington, D.C. You definitely want to be aware of this, okay? Okay, Washington and the new government is tested, and we call this the Whiskey Rebellion. Hamilton's idea. Here we go again. To make money for the government, you don't need to necessarily number this as 4 because there were other excise taxes. But first of all, I want you to know what an excise tax is. An excise tax is basically a sales tax on specific items. In this case, they were taxing whiskey. Why whiskey? Well, actually, it wasn't so much the whiskey, it was the grain that's used to make whiskey. Okay? It was the grain that they used to make whiskey. Now, we're immune to dollar bills. We look at dollar bills, we say they're worth something. You get a $10, you get a $20, and they're worth something. A lot of people, not just Southerners, thought that was worthless. I mean, think about it. You take a piece of cloth, you put a face on it, and say, okay, this is worth something. And you think about that, it's kind of simplistic, isn't it? So a lot of farmers thought that value was in grains, products, horses, cattle, but not a piece of cloth. That was crazy. Well, grain is part of the crop. So grain is value. So what we're doing is we're going to tax grain. Okay? As you can see there, the second line, this infuriated the citizenry and led to the Whiskey Rebellion. So what happened? Well, the first thing I want you to note there is the top left. And note that this is a test. I want you to know this. This was a test. The first major test of this new government. Bryson, this is crunch time. Are we going to pass this test or not? Are you going to let a group of farmers in western Pennsylvania rise up and defeat our government? Well, Hamilton's sure not going to go for that. And Washington certainly knows that our government's brand new, and the last thing we want to do is crash over one rebellion. I mean, this is like Shays' Rebellion all over again. All right, so let's read the screen there. Bryson, go ahead. Read the first part. Maggie, then you take over.
Whiskey Rebellion. Test. In 1790, the new national government of the United States was attempting to establish itself. Because the government had assumed the debts incurred by the colonies during the Revolution, the government was deep in debt. Congress approved an excise tax on all distilled spirits.
United States Secretary of the Treasury Alexander Hamilton proposed the excise tax to help prevent the national debt from growing. Loud protests from all districts of the new nation soon followed. These protests were loudest in the western counties.
The Whiskey Rebellion. Obviously a slam against Washington. Remember, we have the right to assemble, the right to petition, right? Okay. Now, we'll watch that link tomorrow, but I'm going to go through and tell you what happened. Alexander Hamilton understood that putting down this rebellion was critical to really the young life of the nation. I do want you to know something, and listen to my words. Washington actually mustered the troops. That does not mean he led the troops to western Pennsylvania, but he certainly got them ready, and that's actually Washington. Okay. This got very controversial because if those troops go out there and the people of Western Pennsylvania still rebel, are you going to have U.S. troops killing U.S. citizens? Sorry to be blunt, but that's what we're asking. Well, Washington told them that if that's what they had to do, that's what they had to do. Think about how comfortable that makes you feel now. Now imagine that. The federal government, U.S. troops are killing U.S. citizens. Simply put, that's what they're being asked to do. Okay, so let's take a look at this. What ends up happening? Georgia, please.
In May of 1795, the Circuit Court for the Federal District of Pennsylvania indicted 35 defendants for an assortment of crimes associated with the Whiskey Rebellion. One of the defendants died before trial began. One defendant was released because of mistaken identity, and 9 others were charged with minor federal offenses. 24 rebels were charged with serious federal offenses, including high treason. 2 men, John Mitchell and Philip Vigil, were found guilty of treason and sentenced to hang. 17 defendants were convicted of lesser crimes and sentenced to prison terms of various lengths. Upon learning that none of the convicted rebels were principally responsible for instigating the armed resistance, Washington pardoned each of them.
Washington did pardon each of them, okay, and they were pardoned. But the bottom line is the federal government passed the test, and that's what I want you to understand. The federal government flexed its muscle here, okay, and they passed the test. Okay, so let's take a look at the summary there. Amy, when you're ready.
The rebellion was ended when President Washington sent in federal troops. Although the troops faced no opposition, a strong message was sent by the government stating that it would enforce the law.
Strong message, okay? The Whiskey Rebellion, the federal government passed its first test. Kaylee, will you read through this?
Whiskey Rebellion, an American history uprising that afforded the new U.S. government its first opportunity to establish federal authority by military means against state boundaries. As officials moved into western Pennsylvania, crawled an uprising of settlers who learned the lesson of the times.
Okay, we'll talk about some myths of Washington. What's the one on the left and top right showing you there? Go ahead.
Chopping down the cherry tree.
Chopping down the cherry tree. What's the premise of the story? Moral of the story.
He wasn't supposed to do it. Did it?
And when his dad asked him,
He lied.
he didn't lie. He told the truth. Aiden, do you think when you were 9 years old, you would have been able to chop down a cherry tree?
No. I mean, maybe.
Washington was 9 years old when his father died. So is that a myth or is that a true story? Okay. All right, we'll start class with this tomorrow. Go into Canvas there. We got about 4 minutes. Find the video on the Whiskey Rebellion. Give that a look. Okay.